Let's look at the overall summaries, the univariate frequencies and proportions. So focusing on one variable at a time and just asking what proportion of these characters were female and what proportion were male. What proportion of these characters engaged in sexual activity and what proportion of these characters died. Let's start by creating a summary table where we're going to store this data. So I'm going to be counting the different levels, the frequency of the different levels of each of these variables. So I'm going to need a number of males and female, a place to store. I'm going to need a place to store the number of males and the number of females. I'm going to need a place to store sexual activity absent and present. And I'm going to need a place to store survival, died or survived. Let me start with the variable gender. So right here in F3, let's see, I'm going to say gender, male, female. And here I'm going to say count. So in G4, I'm going to be putting the number of men, and in G5, the number of women. Let's explore a bunch of different ways that we can make those counts. First off, very simply, let's sort the data by gender. So I'm coming up to my pull-down menu, data, sort, I've highlighted it. My list has header rows, sort by gender, and I click OK. Excel has a count function. I'm just going to use the very simple count. Actually, I'm not. Just the plain count counts numbers. In order to have the Excel count text, we need to use the function count A. So I'm going to come under my functions and start to search for count. And so we've got count. So it's the number of cells in a range that contain numbers, and count A, the number of cells in a range that are not empty. So we'll count both text and numbers. That's the one we want. So it's now asking which range of cells do I want to count. And I'm going to come and click and drag down over all of the cells that say female. And Excel is just going to be giving me a count. And actually you can see it's giving me a running count of how many rows that I'm covering. Wow, this is pretty tedious. And I'm going to type enter to accept that value. Oops. What have I done wrong? I counted the number of females, but I've got it next to the label for males. I need to bring that down because that's the count of females. So that was pretty tedious. Let's try a different way. We're going to use now a function called COUNTIF. So this counts the number of cells within a range that meet the given condition. So it's a conditional count. I'm going to double click to add that. So equals COUNTIF. The range is going to be the column B. So I'm just going to click on the gray column header B, and that selects the entire column B. The criteria, well, what do I want to count? I want to count, whether it equals male. So I'm going to type an open quotation, that's the double quotation marks, and male, and then close quotation. Using those quotation marks forces Excel to recognize it as text. I believe the newer versions of Excel will auto-correct that for you and will add those quotation marks, but it is something that stumped many researchers in previous versions of Excel. So if you have an older version of Excel, be sure to use the quotation marks. I'm going to type an enter, and there's my number of males. Shall we double check that we got the females right? So we think it was 222. Let me just come down here. And if we say insert a function, count if column B contains the criteria female, 222. Great, we got it right. I'm going to go ahead and delete that. Let's complete our summary table with the counts of the other variables. So we had sexual activity, and we're going to want to do a count of that. And this is either absent or present. Let's practice what we know. That COUNTIF seemed to be the perfect tool for this job. COUNTIF, the column containing sexual activity, meets the criteria absent. Can I use fill to fill this down? So that's just made a copy of it. Oh, that's quite useful, because then I can just come in here and edit the criteria and say, in this cell, tell me if sexual activity was present. And then the last overall summary frequency we need is their survival. And so that's they either survived or they died. And let's count that. Count if column D meets the criteria survived. And I can go ahead and pull that down to fill and edit survived to be died. There are the initial frequencies for those three variables. Our first summary. Let's add a total row. What were the total number of males and females? We can click there and just click on the number of males, plus click on the number of females, enter. Let's do that a different way. I can come to this one, and looking at my ribbon, I see the auto sum capital sigma, and it's making a great assumption. Or I could have typed out equals sum, open paren, click and drag, close paren. The totals are all the same in this case. Don't necessarily take that for granted. You'd always want to calculate all of the totals. Now we want to add some proportions here. We need to do a little bit more work so that our audience doesn't have to. Rather than making them look at 263 versus 222 and needing to think 263 out of 485, 222 out of 485, let's calculate a percent, a proportion, set it all on out of 100 so that the audience can easily see any patterns that are in this data. I'm going to go ahead and add that to this initial table. Let's move things over. So I want to add my proportion males and females right here in column H, but I don't want it to get confused with the next variable. So I'm just going to click on the header H, and under the insert menu, choose insert cells. And that's just going to insert a blank column there. I'm going to do the same thing on here over an L. So I've highlighted column L. I'm going to use the keyboard shortcut, Command Y. That repeats the last thing we did. I'm going to add the label proportion above each of those. That's where we're going. So, what's the formula for this proportion? How do we know what percentage of the total are male equals the number of male divided by the total. Do you think we can use fill? Nope. We got a error message saying that we're trying to divide by 0. You can't divide by 0. Why? Oh, do you see what it did? So fill is very takes it very relative to the cells, and so it's saying take the cell directly next to me and divide it by the one 3 below. So we would have to move that up in order to affix the denominator there. We wanted percentages. It gave us decimals, but that's all right. We can use that hot button to change those into percentage. We want to calculate those same relative formulas. Take the cell next to me and divide it by the one 3 below me, and take the cell next to me and divide it by the one 2 below me. In these other parts of the table, let me introduce you to an Excel function called paste special. So we're going to select that and copy it. We're going to come over here, and what we want to do is we want to paste the formula. So we're going to come up to our pull down menu, and under edit, instead of just choosing paste, we're going to choose paste special and select the formula. And then we can do that again over here, edit, paste special, and choose the formula. So it's taken that formula and pasted it. Let's just check. Yep. I'm putting escape to get out of editing that. And I'm pushing escape to get out of editing that. So there we have our proportions of males and females in this group, our proportions of those characters who were sexually active and those who were not sexually active. And we have the proportions of the ones that survived and the ones that died. When you take a minute and write this into your narrative, I don't think we need to visualize this information, but it would be very useful at this point to start taking notes for your narrative about these proportions in these different categories. While we're talking about that paste special, let me talk a little bit more about it. So at the moment, these formulas are linked to the data. They're dynamic. They're going to update. So sometimes you want that, and sometimes you don't want that. Just for example, imagine we had one more female in our sample. So instead of 222, let's say there were 223. And that has changed that proportion. Let me undo that so that we can see that change. So it's changed the total, and it changed the proportion of males and females, because those formulas are all dynamically updating. When you want your data to be fixed and no longer dynamically updating, you can use another aspect of that paste special. Let's have a look. So all of these are formulas that are linked to my raw data. And if I'm ready to fix them, I'm going to click and drag and highlight them all. And I'm going to choose Edit, Copy, and then Edit, Paste Special. Now this time, I don't want the formulas, I just want the values. And so that's going to just fix the values, forget the formula. And when I escape out of here, so you can see now in the formula bar that they are just those values, no longer dynamically updating, no longer tied to the raw data or tied to each other.